Hey everyone, it's Laura here at What's It Feel Like. Happy New Year. It's 2020. I'm coming to you tonight from my home because our production studio has been closed for the holiday break, for a much needed break for all of us for the last couple of weeks. But I really wanted to come to you because I wanted to share some inspiration for some people that we've spoken with in the last year. We did a video a couple weeks ago that you might have watched on what sparked addiction in 6 people. And now I'm coming at you because it's a new year and we're all setting new goals for ourselves. And I want to share with you what helped these people reach sobriety, what helped them get clean, who inspired them, what inspired them. And because maybe that will spark some inspiration in some of you that are watching this, that are subscribed to this channel because you want to learn more about addiction or how you can help somebody. So the first person I want to tell you about is my friend Robert. Robert is a game changer in trying to help people that have heroin addiction and opiate addiction. He's doing so many things in the St. Louis area, but he himself is a former addict. He was sitting in federal prison a little more than a decade ago on drug-related charges, and it was a fellow inmate that spoke so clearly to him, that shared his story, which led, and a couple other things that were going on in Robert's life, which led him to decide it was time to make a change in his life. Here's part of his story. I know you've probably been asked this a million times since you're a former addict, but what clicked? Why did you have to stop? What made you stop?
So I was sitting in federal prison.
For what?
Drug charges. And,
Selling?
Selling in northern Texas. So I was sitting in prison and, my story is 3 things happened. My father had been in prison my whole life, and I was walking down the same paths as him. I got a letter from my son, Aaron Riley, who was 7, 8 years old at the time. It said, "Dear Robert, stop writing us, stop calling us."
Not dear dad.
Right. And stop saying you're our dad. You know, dads are there for birthdays and these things, and you've never been there for any of those things. And so I got that letter, and the third thing that happened was my little cousin had been shot and killed in a drug deal, over a drug deal.
How old was your cousin?
He was 21, and he was shot in the head with an AK-47. And so...
Was he an addict? Was he involved in the drug deal?
Yeah, he was, yeah. So, those 3 things happened to me, and there was a killing on the unit, and, I was talking to this guy. When those 3 things happened, I was walking the track with this guy, and I was telling him about my dad being in prison my whole life, letter from my kid, my little cousin being killed, and he said, "Come out here tomorrow, I want to show you something." And I came out the next day, and he handed me a piece of paper, and it was his time computation sheet. Next to his release date, it said deceased. And in the feds, you have what's called truth in sentencing. There's no parole system. If you get a life sentence in the feds, you die there. And so he said, "You're going to end up with this." Came off of lockdown 30 days later, and I went to a guy, and I just said, I got to do something. Okay, so that was Robert's story with heroin addiction, and now I want to tell you about Taylor. Taylor was just out of prison, 2 days out of prison. He'd been there for 2 years, and he stayed clean the entire time. But just 2 days after getting out, he bought some heroin, and he was found in a vacant building and had probably overdosed. The EMS folks said he'd been there for about 16 hours before they found him. And here's what it finally took for him to get clean, which was an overdose that nearly killed him. He woke up 3 days later, and doctors then had to amputate his leg. Here's part of his story. And you woke up in the hospital?
Yeah.
And they said what?
3 days later.
3 days later?
Yeah.
How long did they tell you they thought that you had been in that vacant building before you were found?
16 hours. It was noon on a Saturday, and the ambulance didn't get there until 8 o'clock Sunday night. The first thing I said was, "Did I die, or am I dead?" And my grandma said, it was my grandma, she said, "No, but you were." And I asked her if she was lying, like I didn't believe her that I wasn't dead. And that was pretty much it. After that, it was really blurry. Like I said, I had a feeding tube, I had multiple organ failure. My leg, it was still attached at that point, obviously, was like black from like here down. Toes were black. It hurt. Like, I can't describe the pain. It's like the worst pain. It was worse then than it was after it was amputated. I mean, it was just, couldn't touch it, couldn't move. It was crazy.
How was this an awakening for you? I mean, clearly losing your leg is an awakening, but that's a pretty tough and sad story that you got out and you were sober, and 2 days later you were alone in a vacant building doing heroin and then woke up to this. That's a lot to take in. How did you even compute this in your head and realize how far this addiction had taken you?
It is a lot to take in. I don't really know how to start. There's only two ways this could go. I could dwell on self-pity and stay the same, don't make any changes, or I could use this as a learning experience and move on, make it change. And this is what it took. This is what it took for me to change. I mean, like I said, I've been to prison several times. You know, I got family that love me and want me in their life. You know, I have reasons to live and not be a drug addict, but it was just, before, I guess it was easier. Like I said, there's a lot of guilt and shame that is associated with drug addiction. You know, like my self-worth was nowhere. I didn't even like myself, let alone love myself, you know what I mean? And some people say that has to come first before you can love others. So, and after this happened, it was just, I lost my life. And I want to live now. I just can't describe it. And a lot of people say that, you know, I have thought about getting high, but I don't want to anymore. And that's never happened my entire life. I've always wanted to get sober, but just never not wanted to get high. You know what I mean? At the same time, it's like this time it seems so idiotic to me. It's like a light switch in my head was switched on for some reason.
I distinctly remember after that interview asking Taylor how he copes with that daily reminder of looking down and realizing that he lost his leg because of a heroin overdose. And he was really honest and said, yeah, I mean, we interviewed him just months after losing his leg. And he said, yeah, it was a daily reminder, but it's a reminder. And it reminds him that he nearly died and that staying clean had to be his number one priority. I just thank him for being so honest about what drove his addiction. And I'm so glad that he was able to get clean. Okay, so the next person I want to tell you about is my friend Tim, who's a local personality here in the TV personality here in the St. Louis area. He's been sober for more than 25 years, but he was an alcoholic through much of high school and college, and he would black out. He could never just drink one drink. He would black out and wake up and have no idea what had happened or what he had done. And it was one morning that he woke up, and it was just the last straw. Here's what happened when he woke up and who he reached out to for help.
I mean, I knew I was on a bad path, but I didn't care. Yeah, I mean, high functioning is a good way of saying it. I mean, I just didn't have that deep bottom that I hit to really jar me until one night in 1991. I woke up in another strange place with strange people. Didn't know how I got there. My car was out front, and I just had this sense of I just can't go on living like this. I couldn't imagine living my life with or without alcohol at that point. And I had blacked out once again, and I just got up, left where I was, and went to a payphone and called my uncle. And it was my Uncle Andy, who had always been the uncle I visited in Baton Rouge. We were really tight. He had moved to California, was an attorney there, went through a divorce himself, and had just moved back to Baton Rouge when I hit my bottom. And I called him, and he had 2 years sobriety, and I called him and I said, man, I don't know what to do. And he took me to a meeting the next day to start the process of exploring that, and I realized it's at that point that I realized I am an alcoholic. I knew I didn't have any control over it.
I'm so glad that Tim's uncle was able to help him and reach out and give him the help that he needed. As I said, Tim has been sober for more than 25 years. He has a family. He's actually a pastor now. He's doing amazing work in the St. Louis area with all types of groups of people, and I was so grateful that he came and shared his story, because it's not easy. You know, he's had a wife and children since then. They never know him as an addict, but it's part of his story, and he's been very vocal about sharing it. And so the next person I want to tell you about is my friend Natalie. Natalie's daughter reached out to me on What's It Feel Like to tell me about her mother, who was a crack addict for 18 years. And she was in her third stint in prison when she started looking around and noticing some things. Here's what she noticed, and here's what led her to get sober.
I went back to prison in 2009.
The third time?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I was tired, and I noticed that everybody, well, not everybody, but the majority of the population were these young children. And older women in prison like myself, yeah, okay, we doing extended prison terms for recidivism reasons, yet you had these young kids that's sitting in here with 30 years, 20 years, 25. Like, what did you do, you know? And it all came to me. This is your purpose, to stop this. You know, these young kids going to jail and prison for these hideous crimes or senseless crimes, and my purpose is to help stop some of it. So that's when I decided I can't do this anymore. I'm sitting in prison. I got 2 sons in prison. I have to lead by example.
So Natalie is an example of one of those women who it's never too late to make a change in your life. When she got out of prison, she moved to be with one of her children in California, and she ended up getting a degree. And now she's back in the St. Louis area trying to make a difference with at-risk youth. She was addicted for 18 years to crack, and she got clean in prison. So if you're out there and you're saying, I can't do this, there's no way, you can. All these people have. And so I encourage you to take one step today, one thing to change the behavior that keeps affecting you and keeps making you stuck. And another person who was feeling stuck was my friend Tony. I went out to Chicago to interview him, and Tony was taking the equivalent of, he would take 2 weeks worth of Adderall in the equivalent of 3 days. He was having an issue with abusing Adderall, and it wasn't until a few months before he and his wife got married that his wife stepped in and said, something has to change.
I did not stop until my now wife, Claire, realized that it was an issue a few months before our actual wedding. At this point, I was out of college. I was prescribed that directly, and I think that's when it actually took, obviously, its worst turn. Because I had it readily available to me, I didn't have to worry about where I was going to get it as an adult, or the stigma of, like, I shouldn't be trying to search out something that I'm not taking, because it was literally prescribed to me. So I felt like, oh, if I have this, if it's for me, my name's on the bottle, then it's not an issue. I can do with it what I want. And it would get to the point where I would actually give myself anxiety attacks or panic attacks because of how much I was taking it or not having it, not being able to abuse it in situations that I thought that I would want to. And so I did take the first step in telling my wife that this was something I was struggling with. And we had tried a few different scenarios of, okay, how might we still be able to manage being able to take this for the right reason versus abusing it. And it quickly became clear that that wasn't something that I was going to be able to do. And my wife basically said, this is something that you can't just let, it's not just going to fix itself. You're not just going to be able to one day wake up and say I'm have power over this. You need to call your psychiatrist now and talk to him about this. And I was like, okay, I will. And I think the first time I probably lied to her and said that I talked to him. And she was like, no, I need physical correspondence that you talk to him. So I thank her for that, because she made me send an email to her saying, here's the conversation we had, recapped it. And she realized that, yes, I went and talked to him. So that was definitely the hardest thing that's ever happened in our relationship. And I would say, one of the only points of, true disagreement or I don't know, one of the only like large fights that we've ever had, and I like thank her for it, because I would probably still be abusing that, current day.
I think it was pretty honest of Tony to admit that if it wouldn't been for his wife, he'd probably still be abusing the Adderall today. I should also mention that he was abusing the Adderall to help him with his anxiety, but in the end, it wasn't really helping him at all. It was just compounding the issue. And I want to thank Tony for letting us come to his home in Chicago and tape that interview with him. So my final example of someone who's conquered addiction is Susan. Susan was similar to Tim, who we talked about, who had the issues with alcohol, where she could never just drink and have one or two. It was drinking until she was blacked out, until she never just had one drink. And she shared the story of waking up one night on the bathroom floor with her head in a pool of blood. And she was with her boyfriend, who could have done something to help her, and he didn't. And here's why.
So what made you say, this probably isn't working for me?
One day I was drinking and I blacked out. When I woke up and came to, I realized that I was on the floor and I was laying in a pool of my own blood. And I figured out that sometime during my blackout, I had fallen and hit my head on a bookshelf. Normally, that would be the thing that would make you stop drinking, but it wasn't the first time I had hurt myself while in a blackout. What made me stop drinking was I realized that there was a pillow on the floor in that pool of blood. I had hit my head, after falling, and my then boyfriend put a pillow under my head and let me sleep it off. I said, I could have died, And he said, do you think I really care if you live or die anymore? Because you don't. And to hear someone you love say that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that's when I realized I need to stop.
Susan has been sober for more than a decade. She's an accomplished author. She's a professor. She's run triathlons. She's a runner. She's doing all these amazing things in her life. And I really appreciate her willing to open up and talk about some of the darker moments of addiction. So we're really excited because it's a new year and we have more stories to tell. We will have some new content up in just about a week, some things that we're shooting just this week as we open up our production offices and get back to work. We want to thank everyone who's started subscribing in this past year. We're getting close to 20,000 subscribers and we're so grateful for our community that grows every single day. We're excited to tell more stories that we hope will not only touch some of you, but actually help you as well. So Happy New Year. If you're struggling today, talk to somebody or do one thing, one small thing, do something different in hopes that this can be your best year yet. Happy New Year. And don't forget to click and subscribe if you like any of the videos that we've shared with you. Thanks so much.